In the darkest shadows of the Underhive, the bellman made his rounds. He was a stooped, decrepit figure, and he wandered through the darkest depths of Hive Almops, preaching the Emperor's redemption. Broken are your souls, your bodies, your minds, but through the Emperor's light, all may find redemption. All may find healing. Poppy Slickbelly watched from the shadows as the old-robed man rang his bell and gave his sermons. Sometimes the people would gather in small numbers to hear him preach, and he offered absolution from damnation through service to the Emperor. Sometimes people would go with him. Those people never came back. I heard he's with the Arbites. Talks a few of the squiggly ones into slithering out of their holes, only to get a bolt in the head once they're taken topside. I heard he's with the Inquisition. They're doing weird experiments on mutants, trying to get bioweapons for the war. I heard he's getting all the Hive scum together for a rebellion against the governor. Well, how come they ain't nabbed him yet? He's out in the open every day. Poppy had heard the other urchins say such things ever since the bellman first appeared, and every one of his instincts that he developed over his years surviving beneath the Hive told Poppy to steer clear of him. But there was something about the old man that drew Poppy towards him. He couldn't explain it, but he had never heard someone talk the way he did. It wasn't like Poppy hadn't heard other doomsayers before, preaching death and damnation and redemption, with their bodies pale and thin from fasting, and covered from self-inflicted flagellant wounds. But the bellman was different. The doomsayers all had wild, glassy looks in their eyes. You couldn't even see the eyes of the bellman beneath his hood, but you knew he saw you. Poppy pulled his cloak tightly around himself as the bellman walked past, trying to appear as if he hadn't been watching. The old man paused, his cloak swaying gently as he halted. His many charms swung and chimed gently against each other. Some of us cannot avoid corruption of the flesh, but we may yet still purify our souls with bold and righteous action. Poppy couldn't guess why, but he felt as if the old man was smiling at him. As the bellman continued down the corridor, Poppy opened his cloak and looked down at his mottled blue chest, covered in a slick mucus that covered his entire body. Mutation, corruption, filth. Poppy covered his form, and the familiar shame crept over him. The mutants were even below the gangers, murderers, and criminals of the Underhive. Poppy had mostly stayed alive by staying out of sight or being useful. Occasionally he could get work with a gang. He was small, and his mutation let him slide through even extremely tight pipes and vents, which was invaluable help to certain criminal organizations. The mutant urchin wasn't sure why, but he stood after the bellman passed and began to follow him down the corridor, keeping what he thought was an unsuspicious distance. The normal foot traffic died away as the bellman passed into no man's land between the gang territories of Moff's Maulers and the Suture Boys. The bellman stopped. If you have followed me to rob me, I carry very little of value. The old man turned, leaning heavily on his staff, which ended in a simple bell with the imperial aquila above it. Poppy couldn't find his words for a moment. He was used to being ignored by everyone. No, I I just... The old man folded his arms in front of himself and waited for Poppy to sort himself out. He took a deep breath. I guess I was curious. You don't sound like the others. The doomsayers and sinflayers. I don't sound like the others, because very few have experienced the Emperor's mercy as I have. The cruelty of the galaxy robs many of their senses, and they cannot see beyond their own suffering. The old man paused. What about you? What do you know of the Emperor, child of the darkest places? I've heard the stories. He's the god of mankind and a great warrior. He spreads humans throughout the stars. He built the Imperium. He fights the enemies of mankind and slays the witch, the heretic, and the mutant. Poppy nodded, turning his head away from the bellman. The old man nodded his head as he considered his response. Show me how you have been marred. Poppy felt a tremendous guilt wash over him as he pulled back his hood and revealed his slick, hairless scalp. His gray face was ashen, but wasn't particularly inhuman by Underhive standards. But it was the sheen from his film and his mottled blue skin that gave him away. Poppy slumped against the wall in shame of his appearance. There are almost no men that remain pure and loyal to the Emperor's dream for humanity. Mutation is one of the many dark marks of sin of mankind. Corruption of the flesh may be less insidious than corruption of the heart, but it is corruption nonetheless. That is why our kind in particular must seek redemption in service of the Emperor with even more conviction and vigor. The bellman knelt next to Poppy and drew back his enormous, voluminous hood to reveal his face. The boy almost fell backward with a gasp. Before him was no head of a man, but that of a hoary beast. Huge horns curled behind his head, and fur covered the bellman's elongated face. His eyes were set apart wide, and his ears were long and like that of a draft beast. At the base of his chin was a long, thin tuft of a beard, and his mouth was full of sharp teeth. So, forgotten child of the darkest corner, will you walk with me, man-beast that I am, as we offer our lives in service to the Emperor? Though our forms be ruined, we may yet purify our souls, so that when we die, we may walk with him. This is a dark galaxy, little one, with horrors beyond the worst nightmares of the most hardened of gangers. The least we can do is help. Just bring a little of the Emperor's light to the lost and the damned. The bellman pulled his hood back over his head and gestured for Poppy to hide himself as well. In orbit above us is a ship that takes the ruined ones, I gather, and gives them an opportunity to serve the Emperor, though their forms be ruined or they be vicious criminals. This is their last chance to avoid damnation. The man who commands the ship believes that giving our kind the opportunity to serve can deny the hungering darkness a few more souls, and that may tip the balance in this conflict. but the choice is yours if you wish to be among their number, to sail the stars in his holy name." The bellman stood and began to walk away. Poppy sat for a moment and looked around at the dark, rotting underhive that surrounded him. He could hear stubble fire in the distance from some skirmish between the gangers. "Wait! I'm coming with you,"